They say revenge is a dish best served cold. But what if you had to die first to serve it? They say revenge is a dish best served cold. But what if you had to die first to serve it? This is the story of Victoria Wright, a woman who built an empire with her bare hands, a woman who trusted the wrong man, a woman who fell 200 feet into the Pacific Ocean and lived to tell about it. But before we get to that moment, before we get to the cliff and the cold water and the betrayal that nearly killed her, we need to go back. We need to understand who Victoria was. Because you can't truly appreciate how far someone falls until you know how high they climbed. Part 1. The Perfect Illusion. Victoria Wright didn't come from money. She came from grit. She grew up in a small town in Ohio, the daughter of a factory worker and a nurse. She watched her parents work themselves to exhaustion just to keep the lights on, just to put food on the table. And somewhere in those long, quiet nights, Victoria made herself a promise. I will never struggle like this. I will build something. I will be someone. And she did. By 25, she owned her first property, a rundown motel on the edge of a forgotten highway. She renovated it herself, room by room, learning plumbing and electrical work from YouTube videos and sheer determination. 5 years later, she owned 3 boutique hotels. 10 years after that, she had a chain of luxury properties across the West Coast. Victoria Wright Hotels became a name that meant something. Elegance, quality, success. She was proud of what she'd built. She'd earned every dollar, every accolade, every bit of respect. She was self-made in the truest sense of the word. And then she met Daniel. Daniel Wright was everything Victoria thought she wanted. Tall, charming, successful in his own right. He was a real estate developer with a reputation for turning struggling properties into gold mines. He had the kind of confidence that filled a room, the kind of smile that made you believe everything he said. They met at a charity gala in San Francisco. He approached her with a glass of champagne and a compliment about her business. They talked for hours. He made her laugh. He made her feel seen. Within a year, they were married. From the outside, they were perfect. The power couple. 2 self-made entrepreneurs who understood ambition, who pushed each other to be better. They appeared in magazines. They gave interviews about work-life balance and shared success. People admired them. People wanted to be them. But inside the marriage, things were different. At first, the cracks were small. Daniel working late more often. Phone calls he'd take in another room. A distance that Victoria couldn't quite name, but could definitely feel. She told herself it was normal. They were both busy. They both had empires to run. But the cracks kept growing. Daniel started making decisions about their joint finances without consulting her. He'd move money between accounts, make investments she didn't know about until after the fact. When she'd question him, he'd smile that charming smile and tell her not to worry. Trust me, he'd say. I know what I'm doing. And because she loved him, because she wanted to believe in the man she'd married, she did trust him. That was her first mistake. Part 2. The Unraveling. It started with a name. Amber. Victoria first heard it in passing. Daniel mentioned his new executive assistant, a sharp young woman who was helping him expand into new markets. She's ambitious, he said. Reminds me of you. Victoria didn't think much of it at first. Daniel had assistants before. This was business. But then the name kept coming up. Amber coordinated this. Amber set up that meeting. Amber had a great idea about the Portland project. And then Victoria started noticing other things. Daniel's cologne smelled different when he came home late. He'd started going to the gym more often, paying more attention to his appearance. He was on his phone constantly, texting with a little smile that used to be reserved for her. One night, Victoria couldn't sleep. She went downstairs and found Daniel's laptop open on the kitchen counter. She didn't mean to look. Or maybe she did. Maybe some part of her already knew. She saw the emails. Dozens of them. Hundreds. Messages between Daniel and Amber that had nothing to do with business. Messages that talked about when we can finally be together. Messages that made plans for a future that didn't include Victoria. But it was worse than an affair. Victoria kept digging. She looked at their financial records, something she realized she hadn't done in months because she'd been trusting Daniel to handle it. Money was missing. A lot of money. Daniel had been slowly draining their joint accounts, transferring funds to offshore investments, taking out loans against properties they owned together. He'd even increased her life insurance policy to $5 million and forged her signature to do it. Victoria sat in that kitchen until the sun came up, her whole world crumbling around her. The man she loved was stealing from her. The man she trusted was planning a future with someone else. And the man she'd built a life with had just made her worth more dead than alive. That's when the fear set in. Real, cold, gut-deep fear. She didn't confront him.
Not yet.
Some instinct told her to stay quiet, to be careful. She contacted a divorce attorney in secret. She started documenting everything, every transfer, every email she could access, every lie. But she wasn't fast enough. 2 weeks after Victoria discovered the truth, Daniel suggested a weekend getaway. Just the two of us, he said. No phones, no work. We need this, Vic. We've been so distant lately. Every alarm bell in Victoria's body went off. But she looked at her husband, this man she'd once loved, this man who was now a stranger, and she knew she had to be smart. If she said no, if she acted suspicious, he'd know something was wrong.
So she said yes.
They drove to their cliffside home in Monterey, a beautiful property perched 200 feet above the Pacific Ocean. They'd bought it together 5 years ago, back when the marriage still felt real. Victoria used to love this place. The sound of the waves, the endless horizon, the feeling of being on top of the world. Now it just felt isolated. The weekend was tense. Daniel was trying too hard, being too attentive, too affectionate. They had dinner on the deck overlooking the ocean. He poured her wine. He talked about the future, about expanding the business, about maybe taking a long vacation together. Victoria played along, but her heart was pounding. She kept thinking about the life insurance policy, the missing money, the emails about being together. On Saturday evening, as the sun was setting, Daniel suggested they go out to the deck to watch the sunset. It was something they used to do all the time. Victoria walked out first. She stood at the railing, looking out at the ocean, the waves crashing against the rocks far below. The railing felt loose under her hands, but she didn't think much of it. The house was old. Things needed maintenance. Daniel came up behind her. She could feel him close, could feel his presence in a way that made her skin crawl. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" he said softly. "Yes," Victoria replied, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm going to miss this place." Something in his tone made her turn around. And that's when she saw it. The look in his eyes. Cold. Decided. Final. Daniel. She didn't get to finish the sentence. He pushed her. Hard. Victoria's hands grabbed at the railing, but it gave way, rotted wood that had been deliberately weakened. She felt herself falling backward, felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. 200 feet is a long way to fall. Long enough to understand what's happening. Long enough to feel the betrayal in every cell of your body. Long enough to think, this is how I die. The wind screamed past her ears. The ocean rushed up to meet her. And in those final seconds before she hit the water, Victoria Wright saw her husband's face at the top of the cliff, watching her fall. Not reaching for her. Not trying to help. Just watching. The impact knocked the air from her lungs. The cold Pacific Ocean swallowed her whole, pulling her down into the darkness. Her body screamed in pain, bones breaking, organs bruising, everything inside her shattering. And as the water filled her lungs, as consciousness started to slip away, Victoria's last thought was crystal clear. He's going to get away with this. Above, on the cliff, Daniel Wright took one last look at the churning water below. Then he turned and walked back inside the house. He picked up his phone with steady hands and dialed 911. "My wife," he said, and his voice shook just enough to sound convincing. "I think she jumped. Please, you have to help. She's been so depressed lately. I tried to stop her, but... oh God. She went over the cliff. She's gone." He paused, listening to the dispatcher, letting a sob catch in his throat. Please hurry.
Please.
I think my wife just killed herself. And just like that, Daniel Wright became a widower, a grieving husband, a victim of tragedy. 3 days later, they held a memorial service. The coffin was empty. Victoria's body was never recovered, they said. Lost to the sea. Daniel stood at the front in a black suit, accepting condolences, tears streaming down his face. Amber stood in the back, wearing dark sunglasses, holding his hand when no one was looking. 3 months after that, Daniel and Amber were married in a quiet ceremony. They moved into the penthouse Victoria had purchased. They traveled on Victoria's money. They lived the life they'd planned, the life they'd killed for. And Victoria Wright was forgotten. Or so they thought. Victoria should have died. By every law of physics, every measure of probability, every reasonable expectation, she should have died when she hit that water. But she didn't. The human body is a strange thing. Sometimes it breaks when you think it should survive. And sometimes, against all odds, it holds together when it should shatter completely. Victoria hit the water at an angle, not straight down. Her body went under, tumbled in the current, was dragged against rocks, and pulled by the undertow. She broke 3 ribs, fractured her left arm, collapsed a lung. Her skull cracked against a boulder beneath the surface. But she didn't drown. Maybe it was luck. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was rage, the kind of rage that doesn't let you die until you've had your say. Whatever it was, Victoria's body kept fighting. She doesn't remember much of those first hours. Just fragments. The cold.
The pain.
The feeling of water in her lungs. The desperate, animal need to breathe. And then voices. Fishermen. 2 brothers who worked the waters off Monterey, heading back to shore just after dawn. They spotted something in the water. At first, they thought it was debris. Then one of them saw the hair, the pale hand, the unmistakable shape of a human body floating face down. They pulled her into the boat. She wasn't breathing. The younger brother, a man named Marcus who'd been a paramedic before he became a fisherman, started CPR. He worked on her for 8 minutes. 8 minutes that felt like hours before she finally coughed up water and gasped for air. She was alive.
Barely.
They called the Coast Guard, got her to a hospital. The doctors said it was a miracle she survived. The impact alone should have killed her. The hypothermia should have finished what the fall started. But somehow, impossibly, she was still breathing. For the first 2 days, Victoria drifted in and out of consciousness. When she was awake, she couldn't speak. Her throat was too damaged, her lungs too weak. She could barely move without screaming in pain. But her mind was clear, and she remembered everything. Daniel's face.
The push.
The fall. The cold calculation in his eyes as he watched her plummet to what should have been her death. On the 3rd day, a man came to see her. His name was Thomas Chun, and he was a private investigator. He'd been hired by Victoria's business attorney, a woman named Margaret who'd grown concerned when she couldn't reach Victoria and heard about the suicide. Margaret knew Victoria, knew she would never take her own life. Something wasn't right. Thomas pulled a chair up to Victoria's hospital bed and spoke quietly. Mrs. Wright, I know you can't talk right now, but I need you to listen. The official story is that you jumped. Your husband is telling everyone you were depressed, that your business was failing, that you couldn't handle the pressure. He's already filed a death certificate. He's already claiming your life insurance. Victoria's eyes burned with tears, not from sadness, but from fury. Thomas leaned closer. I've been looking into Daniel Wright. And I've been looking into Amber Churn. No relation to me, unfortunately. What I've found, it's not good. But it might be enough to bury them both. If you're willing to do something crazy. Victoria managed to lift her hand slightly. A gesture. Keep talking. You're legally dead right now, Thomas said. As far as the world knows, you're at the bottom of the ocean. And I'm thinking, maybe we let them keep believing that. Maybe we let Daniel think he got away with it. While you heal. While we build a case that's airtight. And then, when the time is right, you come back from the dead, and we destroy them. It was insane. It was dangerous. It was risky in ways that could backfire spectacularly. Victoria squeezed Thomas's hand.
Yes.
Because here's what she understood in that moment. If she came back now, broken and barely alive, Daniel would have time to cover his tracks. He'd have lawyers. He'd have excuses. He'd spin a story about a troubled wife, a suicide attempt gone wrong, maybe even claim she was unstable and trying to frame him. But if she stayed dead, if she became a ghost, she could watch him, build the evidence, wait for him to get comfortable, to make mistakes, to believe he was untouchable. And then she could destroy him completely. So Victoria Wright stayed dead. The evidence. The next 6 months were the hardest of Victoria's life. She recovered in a private facility, paid for in cash by Thomas and Margaret. No records, no insurance, no digital footprint. Officially, she didn't exist. The physical healing was brutal. Physical therapy that made her cry. Bones that had to be reset. Lungs that had to learn to breathe fully again. She had nightmares every night. The fall, the water, Daniel's face. But she pushed through it. Because she had work to do. Thomas brought her files. Documents. Evidence. Together, they built a case that would make federal prosecutors salivate. First, the money. Daniel had been systematically draining their joint accounts for over 2 years. He'd taken out loans against Victoria's properties without her knowledge, using forged signatures. He'd created shell companies to hide assets. He'd transferred millions to offshore accounts. But it went deeper than simple theft. Daniel had increased Victoria's life insurance to $5 million just 3 months before the accident. He was the sole beneficiary. He'd also taken out a separate policy on her through his company, another $2 million. $7 million in insurance money, all payable upon her death. Then there was the Cliff House. Thomas had an engineer examine the railing Victoria had grabbed when she fell. It hadn't broken from age or neglect. It had been deliberately weakened, cut partway through in multiple places, then disguised with wood putty and paint. Someone had wanted that railing to fail. The evidence was damning. But Thomas kept digging, and that's when things got truly dark. Amber Peterson, 28 years old, Daniel's executive assistant and new wife. On the surface, she seemed like a young professional who'd gotten lucky, caught the eye of a powerful man, become a trophy wife. But Thomas found a pattern. Before Daniel, Amber had been engaged to a wealthy tech investor in Austin. He died in a car accident. Single vehicle crash, went off a bridge. Amber inherited everything. Before that, she'd been dating a real estate developer in Phoenix. He died of an apparent heart attack at 39. No history of heart disease. Amber was listed as a beneficiary in his will. Before that, a contractor in Denver fell from scaffolding at a job site. Amber had dated him for 6 months and received a settlement from his insurance company. 3 men, 3 suspicious deaths, 3 payouts. And now Amber had helped orchestrate a 4th. Thomas brought in a forensic accountant, a retired FBI agent, and a lawyer who specialized in insurance fraud. They built a file that was over 3,000 pages long. Every transaction, every forged signature, every suspicious death, every email between Daniel and Amber, including ones where they discussed the plan and being together once she's gone. They had everything. But Victoria wanted more than just justice. She wanted to watch them fall the way she'd fallen. She wanted them to feel safe, comfortable, arrogant, and then have it all ripped away. So she waited. And she watched. Through news articles and social media, Victoria saw her life being lived by someone else. Amber moved into the penthouse. Amber wore Victoria's jewelry. Amber posted photos on Instagram of herself at Victoria's favorite restaurants, staying at Victoria's hotels, living a life Victoria had built. Daniel gave interviews about grief and loss. He talked about starting a foundation in Victoria's name. He accepted condolences and sympathy with the perfect amount of sadness in his eyes. They were good actors. But Victoria was patient. She read every article, saved every photo, felt the rage build in her chest like a pressure valve about to explode. Thomas would visit and ask if she was ready. And every time, Victoria would shake her head. Not yet. She was waiting for the perfect moment. And then, 6 months after her death, she found it. The resurrection. The Pacific Northwest Real Estate Summit in Seattle. It was one of the biggest events in the industry: developers, investors, city planners, media coverage. And Daniel Wright was being honored with a humanitarian award for his charitable work and contributions to affordable housing. The irony was almost too much to bear. Victoria read about it online and knew immediately. This was it. This was the moment. She called Thomas.
Set it up, she said.
I'm ready. Thomas had already been coordinating with federal authorities, the FBI, the Insurance Fraud Division, the Seattle Police. They'd been waiting for Victoria's signal, and now they had it. The summit was on a Saturday evening in downtown Seattle, held at a luxury hotel ballroom. 500 people in attendance. Cameras everywhere. Live streaming online. Daniel stood on stage in a perfectly tailored suit, accepting his award. He gave a speech about loss and resilience, about his late wife's legacy, about how grief had taught him to value what truly matters. The audience applauded. Amber sat in the front row, beaming with pride, wearing a diamond necklace that had belonged to Victoria. And then the doors at the back of the ballroom opened. At first, nobody noticed. The room was focused on Daniel, on his words, on the emotion in his voice. But slowly, people started to turn, started to stare, started to whisper. Because walking down the center aisle, very much alive, was Victoria Wright. She'd dressed carefully for this moment. A black suit that fit perfectly. Her hair styled the way it had been in all her corporate photos. Makeup covering the last of her scars. She looked thinner than before, a little harder, but unmistakably herself. Unmistakably alive. The whispers grew louder. Someone gasped. A phone camera flashed. Daniel was still talking on stage, oblivious. And I know Victoria would be so proud of the work we're doing in her name. Would I? Victoria's voice cut through the ballroom like a knife. Daniel froze mid-sentence. His face went white. For a moment, just one perfect, beautiful moment, he looked like he was seeing a ghost. Because he was. The room erupted in chaos. People stood up. Cameras swiveled. Someone shouted, "Oh my God, that's her. That's Victoria, right?" Victoria kept walking until she was standing at the front of the room, looking up at the stage, looking directly at her husband. "Hello, Daniel," she said, and her voice was steady as stone. "Surprised to see me?" Daniel's mouth opened and closed. No sound came out. Behind him, the event organizers stood frozen, completely unsure what was happening. In the front row, Amber had gone pale as death. Victoria turned to face the crowd, the cameras, the hundreds of eyes now fixed on her. "My name is Victoria Wright," she said clearly. 6 months ago, my husband, Daniel Wright, pushed me off a cliff and left me to die so he could collect $7 million in life insurance money and marry his mistress. I survived. And now I'm here to tell you exactly what he did. The room exploded. Reporters rushed forward. Cameras flashed like lightning. Security tried to restore order, but nobody was listening. And then, from the back of the room, federal agents in FBI jackets began moving through the crowd. Thomas Chun had timed it perfectly. Victoria looked back at Daniel. He was still frozen on stage, award in hand, his entire world crumbling in real time. "You should have made sure I was dead," Victoria said quietly. "That was your mistake." 2 agents climbed onto the stage. One of them took the award from Daniel's hands. The other pulled his arms behind his back. "Daniel Wright, you're under arrest for attempted murder, insurance fraud, and racketeering." The rest was lost in the noise of the crowd, but Victoria heard every word. 2 more agents approached Amber, who tried to run but didn't make it 3 steps before they had her in handcuffs. "Amber Peterson, you're under arrest on warrants from Texas, Arizona, and Colorado." Victoria stood in the center of the chaos, surrounded by flashing cameras and shouting reporters, and felt something she hadn't felt in 6 months.
Peace.
Not happiness. Not relief. Just peace. The trial lasted 3 months. It was everywhere. Every news channel, every newspaper, every social media platform. The woman who came back from the dead. The husband who tried to kill her. The Mistress with a trail of bodies behind her. People couldn't look away. The prosecution's case was airtight. The forensic evidence, the financial records, the emails, the deliberately weakened railing, the life insurance policies, and Victoria's testimony. She sat on that witness stand for 6 hours and told the entire story. Every detail, every betrayal, every moment from the push to the water to the fisherman who saved her life. The courtroom was silent. Some people cried. The jury looked at Daniel with something close to hatred. Daniel's defense tried to argue that Victoria had been unstable, that she'd attempted suicide, and was now fabricating a story out of grief and confusion. But the evidence buried them. And when the prosecution introduced Amber's history, the 3 dead men, the 3 insurance payouts, the pattern that was impossible to ignore, the jury took less than 4 hours to reach a verdict.
Guilty.
On all counts. Daniel Wright was sentenced to 28 years in federal prison for attempted murder, insurance fraud, wire fraud, and racketeering. Amber Peterson was sentenced to 20 years and was facing additional charges in 3 other states. When the judge read the sentence, Daniel finally looked at Victoria. Really looked at her. And what she saw in his eyes wasn't remorse. It was rage. Rage that he'd been caught. Rage that she'd survived. Victoria looked right back at him and didn't blink. "Goodbye, Daniel," she mouthed. And that was the last time she ever saw him. The months after the trial were strange. Victoria had her life back. Her businesses, her properties, her money. But she'd also been fundamentally changed. You don't fall off a cliff and survive without becoming a different person. She sold the Monterey house.
Couldn't bear to look at it.
She restructured her company, brought in new management, stepped back from day-to-day operations. She'd spent 15 years building an empire, and she realized she didn't want to spend the rest of her life maintaining it. Instead, she started a foundation. The Victoria Wright Foundation for Survivors of Domestic Violence. She donated $10 million to start, built shelters in 5 cities, funded legal aid programs, created job training initiatives, helped women escape dangerous situations and rebuild their lives. Because she understood now, in a way she never had before, how easy it is to end up trapped. How love can blind you. How the person sleeping next to you can become the person who wants you dead. She gave talks, shared her story, became an advocate. Not because she wanted to be famous, she'd had enough attention during the trial to last a lifetime, but because she knew her story mattered. Knew it could help someone else recognize the warning signs. Knew it could save someone else's life. 2 years after the trial, Victoria was invited to speak at a women's leadership conference in San Francisco. She almost said no. She'd been doing less public speaking, trying to build a quieter life. But something made her say yes. She stood on that stage and told an abbreviated version of her story. The fall, the survival, the justice, the rebuilding. "They tried to erase me," she said to the audience of 3,000 women. "They tried to take everything I'd built and make it their own. They tried to kill me and then profit from my death." She paused, looking out at all those faces. But here's what they didn't understand. You can't kill someone who refuses to die. You can't erase someone who knows her own worth. And you can't bury the truth. Eventually, it claws its way back to the surface. The audience stood and applauded, but Victoria wasn't done. "I'm not telling you this story to make you afraid," she said. "I'm telling you this story to make you strong. To remind you that you are worth fighting for. That your life, your work, your dreams, they matter. And if someone tries to take them from you, you fight. You survive. You come back. And you make damn sure they regret underestimating you." The applause was deafening. After the speech, women lined up to talk to her, to thank her, to share their own stories of survival. One woman, young and tearful, grabbed Victoria's hand and said, "I was planning to go back to my ex-husband tonight. He's been calling, saying he's changed. But your story, it reminded me why I left. Thank you. You might have just saved my life." Victoria squeezed her hand. "You saved your own life," she said. "I just reminded you that you could." On the drive home that night, Victoria thought about everything that had happened. Everything she'd lost and everything she'd gained. She'd lost her marriage, her trust, her innocence, her belief that love was enough to protect you from harm. But she'd gained something too. Herself. The truest, strongest, most unshakable version of herself. She'd died and come back. She'd been broken and rebuilt. She'd been buried and resurrected. And she'd done it on her own terms. Today, Victoria Wright lives in a renovated farmhouse in Northern California. She runs her foundation. She mentors young women entrepreneurs. She gardens and reads and takes long walks along the coast, though never too close to the edge. She doesn't date. Maybe someday, but not yet. She's still learning to trust again, still working through the trauma, still healing wounds that don't show on the surface. Daniel is in prison. He'll be there for a long time. Amber, too. Sometimes Victoria thinks about them, wonders if they feel remorse, wonders if they understand the magnitude of what they tried to do. But mostly, she doesn't think about them at all. Because here's the truth that Daniel never understood. He didn't just try to kill Victoria that day on the cliff. He tried to kill her spirit, her strength, her will to fight. And that was the one thing he could never touch. You can push someone off a cliff. You can betray them, steal from them, try to erase them. But you can't kill someone who refuses to stay dead. You can't destroy someone who knows her own power. And you can't bury the truth, because eventually, it walks right back through the door.
Alive.
Unbroken. And ready to tell its story.